I'm 94 years old now, and I stayed in a marriage I knew was wrong for 68 years. That sentence sounds heavier when I say it out loud than it did inside my head all those years. When you're young, you don't think in numbers like that. 68 years sounds like a lifetime because it is one. But when I was 26, it felt like I had barely begun living. These days I wake up early, not because I want to. My body just does that now. Around 4 in the morning, my eyes open, and the room is quiet in a way that feels permanent. The house has been silent for years. The refrigerator hums in the kitchen, and sometimes a truck passes on the road outside. Otherwise, it's just me. I sit on the edge of the bed for a while before standing up. My knees don't like sudden decisions anymore. There's a chair by the window in the living room. I've been sitting in that chair every morning for almost a decade. I drink weak coffee and watch the streets slowly wake up. Young couples walk their dogs. Parents rush their children into cars. People move quickly, like time belongs to them. I used to move like that. When you're 94, you begin to understand something simple. Most of life wasn't decided in dramatic moments. It was decided quietly, in ordinary afternoons when you said nothing. I met my wife when I was 25. Her name was Margaret. She had dark hair and a kind face that people trusted immediately. She worked behind the counter at a small pharmacy near the bus station. I used to stop there after work because it was on my way home. The first few times we spoke, it was nothing special. "How's your day going?" "Cold out there." "That'll be $1.15, that sort of thing. But Margaret had a calm way of listening when you spoke, even about small things. I was working at a hardware warehouse then. Long days lifting crates and writing orders by hand. It wasn't the kind of job that made anyone proud, but it paid rent. One evening I told her my back hurt from unloading trucks. She said, "You look like someone who works too hard." It sounds like nothing now, but no one had said anything like that to me before. We started walking together after her shift, just around the block. Sometimes we'd sit on a bench outside the pharmacy and talk about people we knew, places we'd like to see someday. She wanted to visit the ocean. I had never seen it either. Looking back, I think we were both lonely in a quiet way. Lonely people recognize each other. 6 months later, we were married in a small church with folding chairs and carnations on the windowsills. My parents liked her. Her parents liked me. It all made sense on paper. And that's the thing about decisions that shape your life. Most of them look reasonable at the time. The first year of marriage wasn't unhappy. It was simply flat. We lived in a small apartment above a laundromat. The floor vibrated when the machines downstairs were running. Margaret cooked simple dinners, meatloaf, potatoes, soup when money was tight. We spoke about groceries and bills and whose turn it was to wash dishes. Nothing was wrong, but something was missing. I noticed it first in small moments. When she laughed at something on the radio, I didn't feel like I was sharing the laugh. I was just hearing it. When we walked together, our hands didn't find each other naturally. At night we slept close, but it felt more like arrangement than closeness. I remember lying awake once, maybe a year into the marriage, staring at the ceiling fan and thinking a quiet thought. This might not be the right life. It wasn't anger, it wasn't resentment, just a soft understanding that something wasn't aligned the way it should be. But I didn't say anything. You have to understand the time we lived in. People didn't leave marriages because something felt off. You left if there was violence or betrayal or scandal, something visible. But quiet dissatisfaction, that was something you kept to yourself. And Margaret was a good person. That's what made it harder. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't careless. She tried. She remembered birthdays. She packed lunches for me when my shifts started early. She kept the apartment clean in a way that made guests comfortable. But love, the kind that makes your chest feel warm when someone walks into a room, it never arrived. Not for me. Years passed. We bought a small house on Maple Street when I was 32. White siding, a narrow porch, 2 bedrooms. Everyone said we were doing well. I got promoted at the warehouse. Margaret started working part-time at a library. Our lives were stable. Stable is a word people praise, but sometimes it's just another word for stuck. We had 2 children, a boy and a girl. Raising them filled our days in ways that hid everything else. Soccer games, school meetings, scraped knees, late-night fevers. Children give structure to a marriage that might otherwise drift apart. For many years, I convinced myself that was enough. And in some ways it was. We sat together at dinner every evening. Margaret told stories about the library. I talked about inventory shipments and forklift accidents. We were a functioning household. But there were small absences that I didn't name at the time. We rarely touched without purpose. We never stayed up late just talking. Vacations were polite, organized things. Photographs where we stood beside each other rather than leaned toward each other. Once, when I was 43, I met a woman through work. Her name was Diane. She worked for a supplier who visited the warehouse every few weeks. She had a way of asking questions that made you answer honestly, not because she pushed, just because silence felt strange around her. One afternoon, we ate lunch outside the building. She asked me if I was happy. I remember staring at my sandwich for a long time before answering. I said, "I have a good life." She nodded but didn't look convinced. That conversation stayed with me for years, not because I wanted to leave Margaret for Diane. Nothing like that ever happened. But because Diane had asked a question no one else had, and I had avoided the real answer. Time has a quiet way of building walls. You think you're preserving peace by saying nothing, but silence grows heavy over decades. Margaret and I became experts at routine. Morning coffee, work, dinner, television, sleep, repeat. Our children grew up and left home. That's what children do. Suddenly, the house on Maple Street felt too large. Margaret spent more time gardening. I stayed longer at work than I needed to. We were polite companions, sharing a life neither of us had chosen clearly. When I was 68, Margaret got sick. Cancer. The kind that doesn't ask permission. For months, I drove her to appointments, sat beside hospital beds, learned the quiet language of waiting rooms. In those months, something strange happened. We spoke more honestly than we ever had before. One evening, very late, she looked at me from the hospital bed and said something I still hear clearly. She said, "You stayed, even when you didn't want to." I didn't know what to say. I asked her why she thought that. She gave a small smile. "You're a decent man," she said, "but you were never really here with me." Those words weren't angry. They were simply accurate. Margaret died 3 months later. The house became silent in a way I had never experienced before. Not peaceful silence, empty silence. I was 72 then. For the first time since I was 26, I lived alone. You might think freedom would arrive then, but freedom feels different when most of life is already behind you. I walked through the rooms of that house and realized something difficult. Margaret and I had spent nearly 7 decades together, and yet neither of us had truly felt chosen. We had stayed because leaving seemed harder than staying, because society approved, because children needed stability, because time kept moving and decisions felt more permanent every year. That's how 68 years happen. Not with a single mistake, but with thousands of quiet acceptances. These days I think about Margaret often, not with bitterness, She deserved someone who loved her in the way people deserve to be loved. Someone whose eyes lit up when she entered the room. I tried to be a good husband. But goodness isn't the same thing as love, and people feel the difference. I sometimes wonder what life might have looked like if I had spoken honestly when I first felt that quiet doubt at 27. Maybe we would have separated early and built different lives. Maybe Margaret would have met someone whose heart matched hers. Maybe I would have found the courage to understand myself sooner. Or maybe everything would have turned out worse. The truth is, I don't know. But I do know one thing. Time does not pause while you figure things out. It keeps moving. And one day you wake up and you're 94 years old, sitting in a quiet house, remembering the life you lived beside someone rather than fully with them. I don't say this with anger, just recognition. There's a difference between loyalty and fear. I spent many years believing they were the same thing. If you're listening to me now, you're probably much younger than I am. You still have time that stretches out in front of you like a road you haven't walked yet. I can't tell you what choices to make. Life doesn't work that way. But I wish someone had told me something simple when I was young. If something inside you keeps whispering that a life isn't right for you, listen carefully. Not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly, because quiet truths tend to stay quiet for a long time. And if you ignore them long enough, they become the shape of your entire life. I don't regret every year with Margaret. We raised good children. We shared meals and winters and small moments of kindness. But I do regret that neither of us lived the life we might have had if we had been brave enough to face the truth earlier. At 94, bravery arrives too late to change anything. These days, I sit in my chair by the window and watch the street wake up. Couples walk past holding hands. Sometimes they're arguing softly. Sometimes they're laughing. Either way, they're present with each other. That matters more than people realize. My coffee gets cold before I finish it. My hands shake a little when I stand. The days are shorter now, not because of the sun, but because I know how few are left. I think about Margaret sometimes when the evening light fills the living room. I hope, wherever she is, that she knows I did care about her, even if I didn't know how to show it in the way that mattered most. Life doesn't always end with understanding. Sometimes it ends with quiet acknowledgement. And that's where I am now. 94 years old, sitting in a quiet house, knowing that a marriage can last a lifetime and still never quite become what it should have been.